Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to the Climalt webinar on food, health, and climate and interconnected crisis, hosted by Navdani International. This webinar is also part of a project that we are doing with 4 other partners called the Climalt Project, where many of the students that are joining today have followed a course on climate change, its causes, impacts, and solutions. And it's essentially meant for a lot of youth and young people to raise their awareness on climate change and encouraging their critical thinking and action towards the containment of this global challenge. If you want to see more on this course and on the project itself, the website climaltproject.eu has all the information. So we are very, very honored and privileged to have with us today 2 renowned leaders and thinkers and activists, Nimo Basi and Dr. Vandana Shiva. Dr. Vandana Shiva is the founder and president of the Navdanya movement that she founded over 30 years ago. She's a world-renowned environmental thinker, activist, feminist, philosopher of science, writer, and a science policy advocate. And our guest also is Nimo Basi, director of the Nigerian think tank Health of Mother Earth Foundation and a member of the steering committee for Oil Watch International and the Action Research Network for a Well-Being Economy in Africa. He's the author of many books, including most recently, Oil Politics, Echoes of Ecological War, and To Cook a Continent, Destructive Extraction and the Climate Crisis in Africa. Both of our speakers have received the Right Livelihood Award, also known as the Alternative Nobel Prize. And I am Ruchi Shroff, the director of Navdanya International, and I will be moderating the conversation today. Thank you both for being with us today. So let's go on to the webinar. The webinar today, as you know, will focus on the current interconnected planetary crisis of climate and health, denouncing the false solutionism in favor of sustainable solutions. We will be looking at how the current planetary crisis, the health crisis especially, is deeply interconnected to the already ongoing crisis of our industrialized food systems and climate change, and how the solutions to all of these multiple crises, the solutions to climate change, is also the solution to avoid new disease epidemics found in new disease epidemics. In terms of how this webinar will be conducted, I will be asking 4 open-ended questions for each of our panelists to answer. At the end, we will then take some time for an audience question and answer. So to all the participants in the audience, please use the chat to write your questions specifically to Navdanya International throughout the webinar. Do not wait till the end because it'll be difficult for us to then collate all the questions together. We will then collect and put some of the questions together and take them to the panelists. Remember, if you do not address them in the chat to Navdanya International, we will not be able to see your questions. So please remember to put your questions in the chat to Navdanya International. Also, please make sure to keep your microphones muted and your videos turned off in order to focus our attention on the conversation with our speakers. At the end, also, there will be a short questionnaire where you'll be able to give us feedback and any other questions or comments that you would like to give us. The link of this is also emailed to you if you've registered with us or to our Facebook page. So without further ado, let's begin the conversation. Perhaps I can start with Nimo. Nimo, we are living today in a time of unprecedented crisis. Even though all we hear these days is about the coronavirus pandemic, but there are actually multiple emergencies taking place, which have been generated by hundreds of years of planetary exploitation. This exploitation has led us down to the path of irreversible climate change, and now this worldwide pandemic of COVID-19. Could you explain to our students and our audience today as to what the common roots of these interconnected crises are?
Thank you very much, Ruchi, and thank you for having me on this panel with Dr. Shiva. It's really a big pleasure. Now, the roots of the crisis we're having in the world is more or less one, can be traced to the logic of power. It's all about power relations. And these power relations are controlled by politicians, businesses, and the military to a large extent. And the power structure has functioned and existed for so long under the logic of petroleum-driven civilization. And that means the civilization that's driven by a particular source of power that is supposedly very efficient in terms of delivery, but not in terms of the source. And because of this, it's been impossible to see the ecological collapse that the world is being faced with right now. So the power structure maintains itself. The power structure is blind to the environment, is blind to the people, and the power structure ensures that the drivers, as much as possible, to restrict reaction from the populace for civil strife, but rather transfers all the problem in a silent way by controlling the media, the information flow, and getting people to accept to a large extent a false narrative. And that's a narrative of living in a progressive environment, whereas we're actually living in a very degraded environment. So the means, control of power, and the basis for that, and the fact that this is all historical, it has a big colonial root. The colonial past has determined a lot of what we're seeing today in terms of food cultivation, in terms of how we respond to global warming. You see the power structure disallowing a situation where people can speak on equal basis, the massive global inequality between nations and within nations. All these are the drivers of global warming, the food shortage we are seeing, the hunger that is in the world, and even the understanding of the hunger and the shortages.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nimo. Dr. Shiva, you recently, in your May Day message, talked about the fact that we have three pandemics: the pandemic of the disease, pandemic of hunger, livelihoods, and also species extinction. We have seen even in the course, and we have tried to explain the roots of the climate crisis also through the lens of industrial food systems. Could you explain to us how the industrial food system, the climate crisis, and the current disease epidemic are all interconnected, and what is the systems approach that we should use to understand these crises?
I totally agree, of course, with Nimo saying the roots of today's crisis begin with the colonial attitude that large parts of the world, other people, and large parts of nature are your colonies to take over, to exploit, and then to really dump and junk as waste when you've had your fill. That's why every project of mining as mine waste, industrial farming is producing the pollution and waste that is leading to greenhouse gases. When we were having the climate summit in Copenhagen, which was the last actually formal IPCC summit based on legally binding emissions reduction, I realized that even though industrial farming was a very big producer of greenhouse gases and ecological agriculture was a very big solution, the discussion somehow had got narrowed in two ways. First, it had kind of gone into the stratosphere. We were only measuring how many parts per million or how many parts per billion were in the higher atmosphere, and we had forgotten the biosphere. The second is that agriculture as a system was being dismembered, and only the formal agricultural production was being assessed, of which the contributions are between 11 to 15% of greenhouse gases. This includes, of course, carbon dioxide from the fossil fuel intensive farming, because industrial agriculture is nothing but fossil fuel intensive farming, and chemical intensive farming based on chemicals made from fossil fuels. So the production system includes the giant tractors, it includes the nitrous oxides coming from synthetic fertilizers. 1 kilogram of nitrogen fertilizer uses 2 liters of diesel. And nitrous oxide is 300 times more damaging to climate systems than carbon dioxide. And just like carbon dioxide has increased nearly 50% since the Industrial Revolution, since industrial agriculture really is about 50, 60 years old. It's from the end of the last wars. It began in the West, and then through the Green Revolution, it was spread to other parts of the world. It failed as a food system in India, and now it's been taken by dear Bill Gates to Africa as the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa. A big part of the emissions in production are methane. You add all that, that's about 15%, but it's not the only part of the ecological damage of industrial farming to greenhouse gases. A very large chunk, 15 to 18%, comes from what is categorized in the IPCC as land use change. But this land use change means invading into the Amazon forest to grow GMO soya, 90% of which goes for biofuel and animal feed and is anyway not feeding people. That's why it's feeding into the hunger problem. Or burning the Indonesian rainforests for growing palm oil. Same story. It has destroyed indigenous oils, but palm oil is then also used for all industrial purposes, including biofuel, and is the raw material and feedstock for so much. That count is an agribusiness footprint. This footprint of destroying forests is also the reason we are getting emergence of new diseases. All the research is showing that in the last half century, as the invasion into forests has grown by a limitless growth model of agriculture and the economy that Nemo has already mentioned, we basically are seeing many problems emerge from the forests. In Africa, the Ebola came from the forest. Mining, invasion into the forests resulted. And when they blame the small peasants, they don't recognize the small peasant as a displaced person. But the first act of destruction of forests comes from a limitless appetite of a global economy and a global industrial agriculture system. Or even things like Corona, they begin in the bats. And of course, now there's an intense debate of the modification through, is it the Wuhan lab? Is it the Wuhan lab financed partly by research from the United States research system? So the story gets more and more complicated. In India, when I was teaching in the institute, when I was at the Indian Institute of Bangalore in the early 80s, a new disease was starting called Kiasnood disease, monkey disease. The monkeys had come closer to the habitat because of deforestation, and this was a hemorrhagic fever. So the numbers just keep increasing, and then they are multiplied. Their acceleration, amplification takes place in factory farms. So we have a swine flu, we have a bird flu, and because we've destroyed diversity, there's no break. And in nature, if you have only one monoculture, then there's a feast for one kind of pest. If you have only one kind of animal stocked in a factory farm, you're going to get diseases. Another big contribution of industrial agriculture is the fact that it doesn't deal with fresh food. It deals with heavy processing, long distance transport. Average food is moving thousands of miles. A lot of packaging. All of the aluminum, all of the plastic is beginning with processes that lead to greenhouse gas emissions. And retail, we have started a new study on the ecological footprint of Amazon. If I walk down to the neighborhood to go and buy vegetables in my cloth bag, I have a zero ecological footprint. Or if the vendor comes to my doorstep, which is what happens in India. But if Amazon delivers everything, first of all, they can only deliver processed food. They're not going to bring you fresh salad. They have to have a big cardboard box. They have to have a lot of plastic packaging and bubble wrap. That footprint hasn't been looked, but it's feeding into the power equation. Nemo mentioned how its power is at the root of it. Well, Amazon has increased its profits in the Corona time. Personally, Jeff Bezos has increased his wealth by $24 billion. And they would like to see a world where that is the only way food is distributed. So retail becomes a very big problem. And then this is a very inefficient system. In local economies, no part of the food is wasted. Nature knows no waste, and local food economies work according to nature's principles of zero waste. But once you have this long distance industrial monoculture system, 4 to 5% greenhouse gases come from food waste, which also contributes to hunger, which also contributes to disease. So all of those three pandemics are totally related. And we will only be able to address the multiple crises we face by shifting the food system, shifting land use, protecting biodiversity, and shifting from the idea that fossil fuels or their energy intensive substitutes are the only source of energy, to recognizing that food is energy, people are energy, biodiversity is energy. All of these, I call them the living carbon economies, compared to the dead carbon economy of fossil systems that were buried 600 million years ago by the earth. And as Nemo always says, leave it underground. That should be left underground. But above ground, we should allow living carbon and biodiversity to flourish, both to be able to mitigate the emissions, but also have the solutions.
Thank you. So living carbon and diversity, one of the things we will also explore in the next question when we talk about solutions. But before that, Nimo, you spoke about false narratives. We have also seen, especially with the climate crisis, a range of techno fixes and silver bullet false solutions which are ineffective, unproven, counterproductive, and sometimes downright dangerous, often promoted by industry and lobby groups. In the course, we also talked briefly about schemes like Radd and geoengineering, and how the very perpetrators of this very ecological devastation now try to sell us their solutions as the only path forward. Could you talk to us about some of these schemes, what is happening in Africa, and their impact on environmental justice, on local communities?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Again, to continue from where Vandana mentioned about the issue of keeping fossils in the ground, that is the ultimate solution to the release of carbon into the atmosphere. And this is why the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, when they meet at the Conference of Parties, they talk about the fact that fossils have to be left in the ground. They talk about the need to transit to other sources of energy and how to capture carbon and store the carbon somewhere. They talk about technology helping to tackle global warming, but not the simple thing of shifting from this civilization that is driven, civilization in quotes, driven by dependence on petroleum products. So yes, there are a lot of false solutions flying out there, and really that's what captures attention of carbon speculators and governments, and you know it helps to make it seem like something is being done. This is what is driving the climate negotiations. Governments want to show they're doing something. For example, in the Paris Agreement, they came up with this idea of nationally determined contributions, where countries will say what they feel they could, how they feel they could reduce it, what they feel they could do, without really what is the need globally to tackle the problem in a way that is substantial and a way that can meet the goals they set for themselves, which is 1.5 degrees or well below 2 degrees. Already, Africa is set to experience more than 2 degrees already, no matter what countries are contributing to do about reducing emissions. And this will affect also, of course, the small island states in the Pacific Ocean and elsewhere who are already facing land loss, food losses, and all kinds of negative impacts. Now, some of the solutions that are being proposed and which has received official sanctions, one of the solutions that received official sanction is called Radd, R-E-D-D, and they're also called Radd Plus or Radd Plus Plus. We also have Radd type projects. Whether it's called Radd or Radd Plus or Radd Plus Plus, is all still amounts to the same thing. And officially it means, Radd means, R-E-D-D means reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. And of course, everybody wants to stop deforestation. Everybody wants to stop forest degradation. And this is what our communities, forest-dependent communities, have been doing through the ages, defending and protecting the environment because they live off it, they get their medicine from it, they have their recreation there, they have their spiritual spaces there, they have their everything. It's an ecosystem of life. That's what the forest is. But increasingly, the forest is being seen as a carbon stock. People look at trees and they see carbon, not the tree. And so a forest is nothing except a collection of carbon that somebody could protect so as to protect the carbon and so as to give somebody else the right to pollute, believing that the carbon in the trees in my backyard are offsetting the carbon that's being released by polluting industry elsewhere in the world. And this is very funny. This is why some people have said that RED actually means reaping profits from evictions, land grabs, deforestation, and destruction of biodiversity. I think this is the correct definition of REDD. And I'll tell you why. This project is implemented in a way that disrupts local people's livelihoods, disrupts their living strategies and institutions, socio-cultural systems, and is a system that reinforces food insecurity, introduces food insecurity, and keeps people from their territories, introduces new power relationships, new power structures, new power holders. So the industry, captains of industry or governments who buy up forests in certain countries are now the ones who call the shots. They're now the ones who tell people when to go into a forest and when not to go into, what to take from a forest and what they cannot take from there. They're the ones who determine what is a forest actually. And so in the process, United Nations process, if you cut down a forest and plant a monoculture plantation, is still recognized as a forest. It's as if you've not done anything. So you can harvest all the trees and plant a monoculture in the place of a biodiverse forest, and then you continue to reap the benefits, or so-called benefits, perverse benefits called carbon credits. And we do know, if we want to be truthful to ourselves, that if you plant one tree 1,000,000 times on a parcel of land, there may be many trees standing there, but many trees stands, but that is not a forest. And we have the problem also, so monoculture plantation is a big problem that Radd promotes. And of course, Radd doesn't stop deforestation, because you can designate a forest as a Radd forest in one location in a country. That doesn't stop loggers from going somewhere else to cut trees. So you protect a forest in this place, and then you having deforestation somewhere else. That's still, that Radd is going on. People are getting carbon credits and getting paid for it, and it doesn't really change anything. And what we experience in Africa is that there's been massive evictions and human rights abuses when communities are being thrown out of their forests. It's happened in Uganda, it's happened in Kenya, and a stark example was a Radd project in Mozambique that was started in about 2012, or the forest itself started, the grabbing of the land started about 2002. It's called the Nabita Community Carbon Project. In that particular project, families were brought into a contract to plant trees for 7 years and protect those trees for 7 years, and they were paid less than $100 per year. A whole family planting trees and protecting the trees and ensuring that the trees survive, and they were paid less than $100 each year for 7 years. But the agreement they signed, some of them could not even, some of the villagers couldn't read the agreements, and they didn't see the small letters. They signed that they would protect those trees for 99 years, and they would not get any additional payment after the first 7 years. And if those who signed the agreement died off, their children will continue to, and children's children, generations to come will continue to protect those trees for the benefit of those who invested in that Radd project. So that was a very clear case of carbon colonialism or carbon slavery. So we have that. That's what Radd can do. So as I said, one more time, Radd doesn't stop deforestation. It upturns the existing system of defense that people have built over the years. The other false solution is geoengineering, which is also called a very nice term, climate engineering. Now, geoengineering is not really directly mentioned in many of the negotiations that we've seen so far, but every time you hear about there's no way to tackle global warming except bringing in technology to help to solve that. People immediately, what is building behind are the techno fixes, including geoengineering. And geoengineering is simply a set of techniques and technologies that deliberately aim to alter Earth systems at a planetary or large scale. They don't do these things at a small scale. And the idea is to counteract the effects of climate change, not to stop the problem, not to tackle the crisis at source, but to counteract the effects of global warming. So in other words, the climate engineers or geoengineers are striving to take over the planetary thermostat. They could switch what happens in which territory, who is going to have rain, who would not have rain, who would have heat, who would have cold, and things like that. And it means it comes back again to the control, power and control, and can easily really be weaponized in terms of military use. And some of the techniques being proposed include carbon dioxide or greenhouse removals, including carbon capture and storage. And one of the questions we ask, if you capture the carbon, instead of stopping production of the carbon, you capture the carbon, put it in a very beautifully engineered container and bury it maybe at the bottom of the sea or bury it in the mountains or in the rocks. For how many years would they stay locked? Maybe 1 million years, let's say, if you're really a very good engineer, or 2 million years. Now, if humans persist and survive on the planet for 1 million years and that hidden carbon barrel breaks loose, that means you postpone the problem to future generations. And this is an intergenerational crime, actually. And then there's also the solar radiation management system, which includes different ways of reflecting sunlight back into atmosphere. It includes very, very interesting concepts of putting mirrors in orbit around the planet, or putting sunshades in the orbits to just revolve around the Earth and keep on playing with where the sun shines and where the sun is reflected. We have issues of pumping sulfides into clouds to whiten the clouds. If you make the clouds whiter, they will reflect more of the sunlight, more radiation back into the atmosphere, and would thereby cool the Earth. There are also examples of some techniques that could create white surfaces on the ground, or like genetically engineering plants, not to be green, but to be white instead. So you have the albedo effect of reflecting, using some kind of plastics or fabric over territories to reflect more of solar radiation. And there's so many things that they sound fantastic. They sound like science fiction, but they're really things that scientists are working on. There are also cases of ocean fertilization, trying to grow algae in the ocean to absorb carbon. And then the idea is when they absorb the carbon, the algae bloom will grow, absorb the carbon, then die and get to the bottom of the ocean. But this is also just a hypothesis because some of the carbon will be eaten up. I mean, some of the algae will be eaten up by aquatic life system, by marine life forms, and they may never get to the bottom of the ocean. So the carbon may come out faster into the food chain rather than getting to the bottom of the ocean, and it will still be released and still a problem. So we have here a system of that the geoengineering allows carbon pollution to continue, with the notion that even though it's continuing, the effect would not be felt because it's being either captured and buried, absorbed into the ocean, absorbed into lands. There's even a proposal for genetically engineered crops like one called C4 rice that would have enhanced capacity for photosynthesis. In other words, absorb far, far more carbon than any rice variety would, and therefore absorb rice from the atmosphere. All these are ways of avoiding real climate action, and they're all false solutions. Because to start with, geoengineering cannot be done on a small scale. It is transboundary, and territories who may not want to be a part of the experiment will be forced to be a part of either the impact or whatever effect it may have. It protects fossil fuel industries. Even right now, some geoengineering techniques are used to scrape the bottom of the barrel, pump out more oil. That's part of the carbon storage. You push in waste gas from oil fields and pump out more gas, like scraping the bottom of the oil wells. And generally, this is a system of grabbing the sky grab, more than land grab. And in fact, if you add the ocean, it would mean also sea grab. As I said, it's generational irresponsibility, which should not be allowed.
Thank you so much, Nimo. As you rightly said, it is indeed the hubris which thinks about ideas like cloud whitening and putting mirrors in the orbit. It's not just causing environmental collapse. I mean, it's an intergenerational crime indeed. If I could stay on the same topic and come to you, Dr. Shiva, on the issue of false solutions again, we've been hearing a lot about lab-grown food in the name of a solution to climate change, and even an agriculture without farmers. Are these really solutions to the climate crisis? And what are some of the future threats that we face when we talk about these?
So, Ruchi, before I come to that, let me just mention two things following up on what Nimo said. We are in May. The summer should be starting in India. We should have by now harvested the wheat. The blossoms have come on the fruit trees. But every day we are having storms, hailstorms, 2 kilos each hailstone is. And as Nimo said, once in the name of geoengineering and dealing with climate, you achieve the power to engineer the weather and modify weather, you can start using weather modification to destroy agriculture where you want to. And this is something our environment minister had raised in Parliament about 5-6 years ago and said, it's very strange, just at harvest time, we get unseasonal rains. And climate change is not just about degree increase, which is what a lot of Western activists think. Climate change is about havoc. You don't know what will happen. And now we don't know who will make it happen. Earlier it was the fossil fuel industry, but now it is all the players who bring us false solutions. The issue of carbon in the trees and the Radd, but they are talking about not needing farmers and not needing food because soil carbon should be the next financial commodity. And this financialization of agriculture in carbon trade is justified in saying anyway farmers are not earning enough. Well, you have an unjust system that doesn't allow farmers to get enough of their share. They could get 50, 60, 70% of what a consumer pays if it was local tight circular economies. But in the globalized industrial system, farmers get 1%, 4%, 5% at best. And that's why agriculture is driving farmers off the land. Now you're saying you get off the land totally. We want farming without farmers. Those who want farming without farmers are pushing digital agriculture. And because every day I read this, Bayer yesterday said, oh, we are so smart now. We can tell the plant when to tell the farmer when the plant needs water. When first they interfered in the soil with synthetic fertilizers and gave us nitrous oxides, and now they want to be able to change our mind so we don't have a relationship with plants. We forget that plants are intelligent, self-organized beings. If you give nourishment to the soil, they have the intelligence to take the fertility. They have the intelligence to take the water when we need to. And a sensitive, caring, intelligent farmer is totally alive to the need of their soil, the need of their farm. So digital agriculture is the latest invasion now through the digital economy. And who's adopting it? The same poison cartel, the Bayers, the Monsantos, the Syngentas. They are not just talking about farming without farmers, they're now talking about food without farmers. And sadly, a lot of environmentalists have got trapped in the slogan, to protect the farmer, to protect the planet, we must destroy agriculture. But good agriculture is service to the earth. Good agriculture is healing the soil. And the most foundational aspect that is not understood, that food is the basic currency in the web of life. nutrients move in a living food cycle. And those nutrients are what we can enhance by agriculture that's not based on fossil fuels, that's not based on chemicals, and that is not production of commodities, but production of nourishment for the bees and the butterflies and the farming family and the people they have to support. So it is basically, at the end of it, a worldview question. And Nemo mentioned the whole issue of the idea of genetic engineering. Let me just read two quotes. When Monsanto wanted to get into climate solutions through genetic engineering, these were the ads they put in all major papers. 9 billion people to feed, a changing climate, now what? Producing more, conserving more, improving farmers' lives. That's sustainable agriculture, that's what we do. But basically they were talking about genetic engineering. Of course, the million assumption, if they carry on the model of the pandemics, the food system is predicting there'll be 300,000 deaths daily, 130 million pushed to starvation, and 1 billion pushed to hunger and food insecurity. But Bill Gates, who's picking up everything, actually pretends that he's finding climate solutions through producing how the Gates Foundation is promoting flood-tolerant rices. Well, these flood-tolerant rices are something farmers have bred, we have conserved in our seed bank, in Orissa and the community seed bank of Navdanya. We have a variety, Dhula Patna, which is what they've pirated. So biopiracy is another fake solution. And at the end of it, it is about engineering and control and power mentality versus a co-creation and partnership idea of being partners with the earth and not letting the problems be created, but also when the problems are created, finding solutions. And everything in the solutions is a bit like the indulgences. You know, when the Catholic Church was declining, they used to have something called indulgences. You could sin, but you brought the bishop an indulgence, some gold, some money, and the bishop would say, you're forgiven. Your sin is forgiven. So what we are seeing in false solutions are climate indulgences by the rich to make more money out of the crisis they have created.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shiva. Nimo, if I could come back to you, from false solutions to real ecological just solutions that don't just address one part, but issues of environmental and social justice too. You spoke about how communities are already saving the forest and not really looking at forests as stores of carbon. What, in your view, are some of the solutions to climate change growing from the ground, especially in Africa?
Thank you very much. Let me just say a bit about the population issue, because many of our young climate activists tend to believe the argument that the population, human population on Earth is a major problem for climate change, and that this can be solved by population reduction. When I hear people speak about population reduction, that is an announcement of a crime. Because you are not, it's not about birth control, it is controlling the population that's already existing on the planet. How are you going to do that? By warfare? How are you going to do that? By what means would you reduce population? If it's not about controlling, I mean, helping people to decide what and what and what. And you know, the whole challenge about population is that it's governments focus on that rather than providing the social service and safety nets, providing education, healthcare delivery, supporting small-scale farmers in a way that people live productive life that is not hampered by so many external forces. If people have the space to live the good life, in quotes, the good life is an autonomous life, a kind of life that is democratic to societies, I believe that a lot of those problems would be solved. Now, on the ground, as you mentioned, Ruchi, in terms of when communities see trees, see their environment, see their land, they're working to enrich the soil, they're working to maintain their aquatic environment, the mangrove forest, the savanna, they're doing everything they can to protect the forest and protect everything, our environment around them. They are taking climate action. They don't need to call it climate action, but that's what they're doing. Some years back, I went to visit Yakuba Sawadogo in Burkina Faso, who there's a documentary done on him titled "The Man Who Stopped the Desert." This man worked single-handedly with some of his colleagues and family to stop the spread of the desert in northern Burkina Faso. And what did he do? By utilizing indigenous technology, local knowledge, to design technology by making ridges and bridges using stones to slow down the flow of runoff water, and then adding organic matter, and thereby making the soil fertile. I was so shocked to meet farmers who said they're no longer fighting over land. They're no longer struggling to get land because somebody said this. If somebody said this land is the best or this one is the worst, they don't bother about it. They could grow crops on any kind of soil using local ideas, using indigenous technology, and it worked very well. These are real climate action that doesn't require intervention from multilateral agents like the World Bank and the IMF. They're using their own ideas. They just need local support from the local government, and then they get things done. Of course, farmers are promoting agroecology, working with nature. And La Via Campesina said that farming, this kind of farming, cools the planet. That's a summary, a very succinct way of capturing what farming and working with nature can do. And of course, we talk about the intersection between food, health, and climate. When you call a plantation a forest, and you are building the idea of the colonial idea of cash cropping, where the colonial governments in the colonial territories grew plantations for export back to the metropole. And now, if farmers are not able, that they stop from maintaining their forest in a way that they could plant trees that provide medicine, that provide food, and provide whatever resources they need without even thinking about the climate. If that is disturbed, then of course you are distorting the processes of citizens being directly involved in climate action. And the real climate action is people enjoying resource democracy, or earth democracy, as Dr. Vanilla Shiva puts it. Earth democracy is a clear pathway forward to tackling global warming from the grassroots. People have a right to say what happens in the environment. The free, prior, informed consent is not just a formula. It's something that is integrated, that must be an integral part of discussions about so-called development and activities in anybody's backyard. And so the other solution I would like to mention is something that communities across the global south have proposed, following the technical solutions being offered by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. At the initial stage, prior to Copenhagen COP of 2009, which was COP 15, prior to that, you had Annex 1 countries, you had non-Annex 1 countries. And the Annex 1 countries were countries that were heavily polluting, and non-Annex 1 countries were countries who had little or nothing to do in terms of being the reason for pumping carbon into the atmosphere. And so you had the common but differentiated responsibilities in terms of support for those countries who are suffering impacts and with that contributing to the problem. Now, communities, especially those who in fossil fuel impacted communities, have suggested there should be an Annex Zero category in the climate discussion. That means communities, territories, nations who decide to keep fossil fuels in the ground, to leave fossil fuels where they are. And this already we're seeing some countries doing this. France has said they're not going to extract fossil fuels from their territory. Costa Rica said the same thing. The Ogoni people have maintained a non-extraction of fossil fuel from their territory since 1993. We've seen struggles elsewhere in the global south, in some parts of Norway, in Lofoten area, fishers have stood up to say, no, don't extract oil offshore. We're going to destroy our fisheries. We're going to destroy our environment. We're going to pump more carbon into the atmosphere and compound the climate problem. And so we've seen places, grassroots actions say, look, these people, these territories, these nations, these peoples should be recognized as belonging to a net zero, taking real climate action, and they should be compensated. They should be supported to keep those carbons in the ground as a real and very valid climate action. These are some of the tendencies I'm seeing from the grassroots. I believe that this is the way forward to tackling the global warming problem.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dimo. Your communities, as you say, working with nature are already taking climate action. Dr. Shiva, you talked about co-creation and partnership. At Navdanya, we have been working over the last 30 years, practicing and promoting and amplifying biodiversity-based ecological agriculture or agroecology. Could you explain to us how local ecological food systems provide a solution not just to climate change, but to the hunger, health, livelihood crisis, and how exactly is Navdanya implementing this on the ground?
So in 1984, when I started to look at why was agriculture causing so much harm, why were people dying in Bhopal when a pesticide plant leaked, why was Punjab the land of the Green Revolution erupting in violence, and I started to look at agriculture and wrote the book Violence of the Green Revolution, I realized the biggest flaw in agriculture is a false productivity. So these are the kinds of graphs that come out of FAO. You know, the bubble in 1900, it was so small and the food keeps growing bigger. And you think that bubble is food. The bubble is not food. The bubble is how much acreage a farmer cultivates. So they define the farmer as an input, and they define an agriculture which uses fewer farmers as productive, even though it does not produce more food, as our biodiversity-based measures have shown. Biodiverse intensive farming produces more food. It produces more nutrition per acre. That's why we don't measure yield per acre. We have created the indicator of health per acre and wealth per acre. And it's the biodiversity intensive agriculture that gets rid of chemicals and gets rid of fossil fuels, and therefore also solves the climate problem. That is the answer to the hunger pandemic. Our research is showing we could, if we farm the way Navdanya farms all over the country, we could feed 2 times India's population. And I think this would be true across the world. I have traveled with Nemo in the Niger Delta. And I look at that land and say, my goodness, yeah, it is so rich. If only we grew biodiversity rather than monocultures, just like a forest, tree plantation is not a forest. A crop monoculture is not a farm. It applies the same way because agriculture is care for the land. Care for the land means you must keep giving back to the land. That's called the law of return. And over the years, as we've done ecological agriculture, as we've saved seeds, all kinds of seeds, thousands of seeds in 150 community seed banks. When a cyclone hits Orissa, we find we have salt-tolerant seeds. When a flood affects a region, we have flood-tolerant seeds. So bringing the seed back into the commons through climate change, giving back to the earth, we were just doing it because the right way to farm. And 2 years ago, we got the top soil ecologists to do a study across the country, but in Dehradun, in our valley, organic matter has gone down 14% in the chemical farms. It has gone up to 99% in the organic farms. That is how you fix the carbon and bring it back through the plants to the soil. Nitrogen. Soils where you apply urea and nitrogen fertilizer, you think you have more nitrogen. The nitrogen has gone down 22%. On organic farms where the earthworms are working, the soil mycorrhiza are working, the nitrogen fixing plants are fixing the nitrogen, you have 100% more nitrogen. Potassium, 84% more potassium. Phosphorus, 63% more. So you don't need external inputs. In fact, they're depleting the nutrition of the soil. You need the ecological inputs by looking after the earth, but you don't just get the solution to the broken cycles of nitrogen and carbon, which is what climate change is. It's the rupture of the Earth's metabolism by depending on that oil from underground. If you allow the recycling of the biosphere, the atmosphere, you don't just solve the climate problem, you make the soil fertile and reverse desertification, but you actually produce more nutrition. Zinc, a doctor came and saw our data, she couldn't believe it. It's down 37%, that's why there's zinc deficiency. And in the COVID crisis, they're finding that many of the people who died had zinc deficiency. On the other hand, in the organic farms, we have 14% increase in zinc. Magnesium, 17% down, 14% up. These trace elements are what make our body's metabolism work. But it's this recycling that allows the planet's metabolism to work. And that is the reason we have to reverse not just colonialism and the fossil empire, but the fossilized mechanical thinking that was necessary to enslave people, to turn Africans to slave, to pick cotton in America. It was necessary to treat labor as an inert input and now come to the conclusion that we've got to get rid of the last farmer. When I wrote my book, Soil Not Oil, I realized that we have to recognize that mechanical systems run on external inputs, fossil fuels, they generate entropy, they generate waste. That's what greenhouse gases are. Entropy is power and energy you cannot use. Whereas living systems, human beings, plants, we reverse entropy. Isn't this a miracle? But all of your energy in mechanical physics only teaches you about all systems having a constant increase in entropy. No, living systems reverse it. That's why there has been life on the planet. And that life has got enriched over 4 billion years.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Shiva. From the ecological solutions, if I could just segue into the road post-COVID, road to a post-COVID future. To both Nimo and Dr. Shiva, how do we plan for the road to a post-COVID future that works for the health of the planet as well as the people? We've addressed some of this already in the previous answer, if you could give a shot.
Yes, thank you, Ruchi, and thank you, Pandana, for that those words that you shared. Now, we are still in the pandemic. We're told when we got into it, and we're hoping that one day we'll be told that we're out of it. Somebody's holding the chalk and the board and tell, oh, this pandemic has started and this and that. So there's a system of control that is going. And I think is now we really have time to reflect about what would happen after the lockdown is lifted globally. We need to learn from history, because if we don't learn from what is going on and project to the future, we may just be taken by surprise by what we're going to see. Now, what we've seen over right now is, and from reports we've been reading, is that the amount of greenhouse carbon in the atmosphere has reduced somewhat. And of course, there's less because of reduction in transportation, and probably some reduction also in industrial activities. Although I've seen that oil production is still going on, even though the price has collapsed. We've seen one thing we could ask ourselves, with post-pandemic era, will the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, the rate of pumping of the carbon into the atmosphere, would it be different from what it was before the pandemic? Now, oil prices have collapsed and countries and corporations are running haywire trying to set things up. Would the sector go back to excavating more and more fossil fuels after the pandemic? I think the answer to both is that really the reduction may not hold, because the moment we've learned to do a lot with restricted movements, but it does appear that people like to be on the streets, they like to be on the move. With just this week, the lockdown was partially reduced in Lagos, Nigeria, and then what we saw was a massive rush of people out on the streets. The social distancing became a thing that you really had to look for to see. People were wearing face masks quite all right, and face masks has become a part of the fashion. People are finding face mask that matches their clothes, and so it becomes something like just making a fashion statement. Now that's problematic because it means we're not looking at the problem; we're just making light of the tragedy. One of the things we've seen also before the pandemic ends is the determination by politicians to open up factories, get workers back to work, discounting labor, effectively discounting the life of workers, pushing them into factories and meat shops in an atmosphere of absolute uncertainty concerning safety, but because they want to score points, and because also workers are desperate to keep their jobs and earn some income, workers are ready to go to the front line, just like, to earn a living. But we need to consider all this. So going to the future beyond, after reading what is going on now, understanding that we have to really fight for justice, fight for our rights as workers, as citizens, right to have health structures, not for the IMF and the World Bank and the African Development Bank and the rest to start to rush money to fight the pandemic, whereas they would not support the setting up of viable health systems. We have to really struggle against this kind of rush responses. And it will be a time for us to say we need culture smart agriculture. We have to put the culture back in agriculture. Climate smart agriculture is a real outside what has been developed from natural systems developed by our farmers. The genetically engineered climate smart agriculture is an insult on the crops as well as on our food systems and our people. So it really will be the post-pandemic period will be a time to shout very loudly, soil, not oil, fish, not oil. It's a time to step up this campaign because this is what feeds our people. This is what gives our people jobs. In Nigeria, 6.5 million fishers at work and producers and processors. The oil industry, I was told yesterday in a meeting we had, employs 65,000 people. Compare 65,000 to 6.5 million people who are working in a sector that is being challenged by the fossil fuel sector. Then you find that you are really sacrificing our people, sacrificing labor, and sacrificing a viable economic system that we ought to run that is in tune with nature. And then the post-pandemic period should be a time we should all speak up for the recognition and payment of ecological debt and climate debt. We can't just keep on ignoring this and wish and moving on as though nothing is happening. We talk about the Green Climate Fund and nothing is going to the account. The little that goes to the account is not even going to, may not get to those who are really impacted by global warming. If we keep on moving in denial by ignoring the fact there's a climate debt that somebody took up the carbon budget. Somebody took 80% of the atmosphere with the carbon and greenhouse gases, and somebody should be responsible for bringing us to this dilemma, to this crisis point that we are in now. And they should be ready to pay for that, Paying for that, if you pay the climate debt, you take care of loss and damage, you take care of building resilience, you take care of adaptation, it will take care of mitigation up to a point, at least up to a reasonable point. But then it will not be a matter of indulgence as carbon credit is. You clear, you are conscious, you keep polluting. It will be a recognition that we have to live differently. And this, to me, is the question of also redefining what is living well. Now, people have been trapped in their homes for some months now. They have a lot of money, they have a lot of cars, somehow private jets, but they can't go anywhere. What is the value of the accumulation? Primitive accumulation. What is the value of that? How does that make you live well? How does that make you relate more to your environment, to your people? How does that make you look at the future? If we ask ourselves these soul-searching questions, we'll be able to make a roadmap to the post-pandemic society and in new configurations of relationship where we respect ourselves, we all live in dignity, and the respect will go beyond just human beings, but all other beings on the planet.
Thank you so much, Nima. Thank you very much. Dr. Shiva, if you could give us a few remarks also on the planning for the post-COVID future.
So if we realize that the COVID crisis is a multiple pandemic, then we have to, first of all, reduce the footprint of the economy as well as the agribusiness. We don't have to invade forests. The forest should be left for forest people, forest dwellers, indigenous people, and all the other diversity in those forests. We really should have a moratorium on touching ecosystem, any forest ecosystem, for the health of the planet and for the health of those who are not in the forest, as these new pandemics have shown us. We need to definitely move to an agriculture that doesn't lie. An agriculture that lies on productivity, uses 10 times more energy inputs than it produces. And if you go to fake food, on a very rough calculation, I think it'll be 1,000 units of energy, of input energy to produce 1 unit of food, when human beings working with living systems can use 1 unit of energy to produce 10 units of food, because we reverse entropy. So intensification of nutrition, biodiversity, ecological systems, not intensification of fossil fuels and chemicals. And related to this is the third pandemic, the creation, deliberate through industrial agriculture, of unemployment and dispossession of farmers. They became the migrants in the cities. They have been flushed back. Half of India is having to move back to villages. We need to find ways to rejuvenate the land. The Green New Deal was addressed to the Dust Bowl and the fact that there was a Great Depression. And the two were brought together to say, let's create work in regenerating the earth. That is the main work we have to do. For that, we have to question every policy and stop it that encourages the continued destruction of the planet, continued emissions of greenhouse gases, while creating hunger, unemployment, and disease epidemics. I think one of the things that most people aren't looking at, that the big violent lockdown, one of our former chief justices has called it a violence against all of society, especially the working people and the poor. And it's all being done in the name of a forced digitalization of the economy. Yeah, you're being told from home is the new normal. Children are being told working on your computer is the new normal. Everyone is being told you can't have cash, you have to have digital transfers. And there are people, like there's this wrong word of decarbonization, when all we need is recarbonization of living carbon and decarbonization of dead carbon. There's a new word being created by the World Economic Forum, Bill Gates and all, who are talking about dematerialization through digitalization. Let me leave you with just 2 figures to show you how big the ecological footprint of this system is. 1 Bitcoin, 1 cryptocurrency transaction. And Gates, every one of these people is trying to move to cryptocurrency. 1 transaction takes 24 terawatts, uses as much energy as an American household over a month. And worse, if we leave our ability to work, and 90% of the people are made unemployed and the 10% are forced to work digitally, we think that because it's digital, there's no footprint. 1 computer, just 1 computer, takes 539 pounds of fossil fuels. It's embodied fossil fuels, 48 pounds of chemicals, 1.5 tons of water to manufacture 1 computer, 1 monitor. And if you imagine that if the whole world is just full of these systems, how much they could, and if you look at the waste, the e-waste is one of the worst things. So we need to start in the post-COVID world, taking the full cost, including the cost people pay and the cost the planet pays, that is always hidden. And 2, looking at the full life cycle, not the public relations. Full life cycle, always taking into account people and the planet. What does it do to the planet? What does it do to people? And the people who are going to benefit from it can't be the ones who give us this audit. It has to be a democratic audit by those impacted. That's why I talk of Earth democracy.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Shiva. So soil, not oil, fish, not oil. We need to look at the full cost and the full life cycle, carry out a democratic audit if we have to plan for a post-COVID future. We have to leave the forests, a moratorium on touching the forests, and work towards an agriculture that does not lie, without lies. Thank you very much to both the speakers. We have a lot of questions, but what I'm going to do, if we can take just a few minutes, I will quickly read them and we can couple them, some of them together. Some of them are interesting questions. And then perhaps, each of you can take a couple of questions together and we can have one response each on these questions. Sure. If you just give me a second, I will just quickly read them to you. So we have one question which says, do you support a plant-based diet as a possible solution to climate change? What do you think about its applicability in the most polluting countries, since it is basically impossible to provide enough meat for everyone without destroying the soil? I think this is an interesting question. Then there's a question for Dr. Shiva. Then there's a question for Nimo on the remark on population reduction. Why do you think that population reduction is something that should not be done? And how can we feed so many people if the export of food is not what we want? So the issue of population reduction and why it is such a problematic, this is something I think it's important to clarify even further. Another question, how can we use the current health crisis to overcome power relations and create more sustainable agriculture with more international solidarity? In Benin, there is a great belief in sacred forests where the gods of the communities live. For Mr. Nimobasi, based on your explanations, can we consider this as a form of fight against deforestation and climate change? And then how can we support the work of Nimobasi and Dr. Vandana Shiva? What are the possibilities in supporting this work and in action? I think that's it. I will just quickly look if there's anything else, and then I would just give the floor to you. Regarding colonialism, climate change, and ecosystem destruction, are there books, articles, and movies? I think we can send them privately on these issues. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, plant-based diets, population reduction, and how do we? Plant-based diets, population reduction, sacred forests, and how do we use the current health crisis to overcome power relations and create more sustainable agriculture? Should I start with you, Dr. Shiva?
Sure. On the decolonization issue and the colonization issue, I've just done a book called Oneness versus the 1% that goes through how what is happening today is a continuation of colonization, except that the colonies are becoming invisible. When the colonizers' armies went earlier, they were physical, they were visible, and they took territories, they enslaved people. We still have enslavement, we still have colonies, but the new colonies, and this is why we need a new understanding of freedom and a new understanding of slavery, the new colonies are our bodies and our minds. And the COVID is a time we need to think of this much deeper. Our bodies, why? Because the bodily data is now a new big data. And most of the digital barons, the richest people, the Amazons and the Bill Gates and the Jeff Bezos, are all people who mined our data and then sold it out back to us through taking patents and carving monopolies. So these are new enclosures of the commons. I call it our body is our commons and it's being enclosed. And I'll just touch on the population issue. Nimo will talk more. But my research and work has shown that it's when the enclosures and resources of the people are taken that they're compelled to have larger numbers. And when the resources are shared, the numbers come down. The example of the case of the state of Kerala is a very clear example. They did not have coercive population control, but they had justice. They had universal healthcare, universal education, and land distribution to the poorest. those three things ensured you didn't have to have a large family to survive, and the negative growth started. So justice is the best way to bring population down. The word population control means someone is controlling, and I think that's why Nemo doesn't go for it. As far as plant-based is concerned, I eat plants. I eat hell of a lot of plants. We've saved so much diversity. I say eat plants, of course. And for nature, I would say work with nature. But the minute you put based, it means that self-standing, autonomous living system, nature or plants, are now being turned into the new raw material. The word based tells you that now it's being processed in factories and turned into fake food with very high energy intensity, with a lot of GMO use, with a lot of additives, and this cannot solve the problem of health, and it cannot solve the problem of the planet, and it can definitely not solve the problem of the uprooting of the peasants. So let's say, yeah, eat more plants, eat more biodiversity. Our gut microbiome needs it. But let's stop using the word based for things that stand in their autonomy.
Thank you so much. Nemo, would you like to go?
Yes, thank you. I think Vandana gave a brilliant answer to the population issue, but let me just clarify when I said about what I said was the fact that you cannot talk about reducing the existing population on Earth. You could talk about reducing population growth, but you cannot eliminate living beings so as to bring the population down from 7 billion to 5 billion, or to reduce from 8 to 4 billion. That would be a crime. And I stand by that. And actually, as Vandana said, if there's justice in a society, you have healthcare needs provided, you have social justice, inequality, the society is more equal, there will be, and things are just more better distributed, there will be less need to have large families. And in fact, speaking for my system, my understanding of my community, my country, if young women, for example, and young men have a certain number of years to spend in school, up to at least the end to complete high school education, or so any kind of education, be it local or standardized or whatever, traditional or whatever, apprenticeship or so on. If young people are engaged up to that age, educating themselves, learning before they begin to become leaders of families, they have less number of children. And so when governments and speculators and vaccine speculators are busy thinking about how to make money by forcefully tackling population problem artificially, that doesn't really address the issue. It's an issue that has to be democratic by providing the basic platform for people to enjoy their life and to live well, to be supported by the system, to support one another. And then they need to have large families and large groups of people will become less pronounced. Then the question about sacred forests, whether the sacred forests can be taken as climate action, preservation of sacred forest. The short answer is yes. The long answer is, I'll go back to history. When the colonial forces came to Africa, they saw natural forest, protected forests, and they called them evil forests. They called the sacred forest evil forest. That was the way of bastardizing the system, a way of destroying local cultures, a way of control. Because if what you had was presented as evil, or as being as bad, as unacceptable as evil, then of course the thing was you should abandon it, cut it down, and then you would find that what people took as totems, the animals they protected, the trees they protected, the trees they won't cut down, they were now subject to be cut down. Of course, when you find a tree that's been there for hundreds of years, the colonial master or the logger, or today's logger, timber magnate, wants to cut it down and ship it somewhere to make furniture for themselves, and thereby destroying the forest and also adding to global warming. And so sacred forests should be protected. They are already protected by the local people, and customary forests should equally, whether sacred or customary or whatever the name is, they should, their hotspots, their biodiversity hotspots in Africa and across the global south. And this should be defended and not destroyed. That is those are the sites of real climate action. Those are trees and soils that are, and rivers that are absorbing carbon, not because somebody is looking for carbon credit, but because it's the right thing to do, because that is life. Yeah, I think those are the, of course, I support plant-based diet. I used to tell my friends from Europe, especially, that, look, I'm a vegetarian occasionally, but not, I wasn't, not by choice, but it's just natural. In my village, we eat mostly plant-based food, and occasionally we add fish to that. Eating meat is not a big deal. We don't go to the shop and just have a pile of meat on the plate. No, that is not, So plant-based diet, or well, we say we shouldn't say based, because that suggests processing. I just learned that today. Thank you, Badana. We should eat natural in terms of plants and vegetables. It's more healthy for us. And if you notice, what the pandemic, the ongoing pandemic, when people's immunity is compromised, that's when they become more susceptible to the impact of the pandemic. And if you eat healthy, of course, your immune system gets more strengthened, and you stand a better chance of getting through without any negative impact from the coronavirus. So how do we use the current system to overturn? I think this was something we're grappling with throughout this conversation. The current system the current challenge has shown us that things have to be done differently. It's just for us to re-educate ourselves, decolonize the narratives, and draw up a roadmap to where we want to go to. From different parts of the world, the picture of the future would all more or less be the same: one of justice, one of equality, one that is pro-nature, and then we can all use different systems, work from different templates, aiming at the same end result, because we cannot prescribe a uniform action response like the system is prescribing uniform response to the coronavirus. That wouldn't work.
Thank you so much to both of you. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. Thank you once again to Dr. Vandana Shiva and Nimubasi for sharing with us your thoughts at this critical moment. Indeed, Earth democracy and soil not oil, and plants are not a raw material and forests are not carbon. We need to look at the entire life cycle. We need to look at full costs and full benefits for any of the solutions that we are looking at. I thank you both once again. For all our participants, if you would like to follow either of our speakers or the work of Navdanya International, you can follow Nimo's writings on nimobasi.net. And the page for the Health of Mother Earth Foundation, homef.org. You can follow the work of Navdanya International and Navdanya at navdanyainternational.org. We will put all of these links on the page. You can write to us with more questions and comments. And please check out our campaigns. I know there was a question on pesticides also. You could please join our work in campaigns for a poison-free agriculture and food system, one planet, one health, connected through diversity, and write to us at info@navdanyainternational.org. Thank you all very much once again. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you so much, Nimo. Thank you, Dr. Shiva. Thank you.